The silver ships of the Zephyrian fleet hung in space like dying stars. Admiral Kethver watched through the bridge windows as another vessel exploded in the distance. The third one this hour. Soon, his own ship would join them. "Sir, we're getting reports from the outer rim," his communications officer said. The young Zephyrian's blue skin had turned pale with fear. "The Devourers have taken another system." "That's 12 in the past month." Kethver closed his 4 eyes and tried not to think about the billions of lives lost. The Devourers didn't just kill, they consumed everything. Planets, stars, even the space between them. They left nothing but empty darkness behind. "Any word from the Council?" he asked. "They're still arguing, sir. The Valkyrie want to retreat to the core worlds. The Nexari think we should make a final stand at the threshold gates. Nobody can agree on anything." Of course they couldn't agree. That was the problem with the Confederation. Too many voices, too many opinions, too much pride. For 3,000 years, they had been the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. They had ships that could travel between stars in seconds. They had weapons that could crack moons. They had minds that could solve any problem, except this one. The Devourers had appeared 6 months ago from the dark space between galaxies. At first, the Confederation thought they were just another species to contact, maybe trade with, possibly recruit. The first diplomatic mission had lasted exactly 17 minutes before the entire fleet was turned into raw materials for more Devourer ships. Since then, it had been nothing but retreat and death. "Sir," the communications officer spoke again. His voice cracked. "We're getting a priority message from High Command. They want all fleet commanders to report to the capital immediately." "All of us? What about the defense lines?" "There are no defense lines left, sir." Kethver felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had been a soldier for 60 years. He had fought pirates, rebels, and even the occasional rogue AI, but he had never faced an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with, bargained with, or at least understood. The Devourers were different. They didn't want territory or resources in the normal sense. They wanted everything. They consumed matter and energy like a disease, growing stronger with each world they took, and they never stopped. "Set course for the capital," he ordered. "Maximum speed." The trip took 3 days. During that time, Kethver received reports of 5 more systems falling to the Devourers. Each report was the same. The enemy appeared without warning, overwhelmed all defenses, and left nothing behind but empty space. The Confederation capital was a massive space station called Unity. It was built at the center of 7 different star systems, connected by jump gates that allowed instant travel between worlds. Millions of beings from hundreds of species lived and worked there. It was supposed to be a symbol of peace and cooperation in the galaxy. Now it looked like a refugee camp. Ships from every corner of Confederation space crowded around the station. Military vessels mixed with civilian transports, all carrying beings who had fled their homes ahead of the Devourer advance. The docking bays were full, so most ships just floated in space, waiting for news, waiting for orders, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Kethver's ship was assigned a docking port deep inside the station. As he walked through the corridors toward the council chambers, he saw the faces of his people. Fear, confusion, desperation. These were beings who had never known defeat, never even imagined it was possible. The council chamber was packed. Representatives from all the major species sat in their designated areas, their voices creating a wall of noise that hurt Kethver's ears. He found a seat near the back and listened to the arguments. "We should evacuate to the Andromeda Galaxy," said the Valkyrie ambassador, her tentacles waving frantically. "The Devourers came from dark space. Maybe they won't follow us there and abandon everything we've built?" The Nexari representative's scales flashed red with anger. "This is our galaxy. We should fight for it." "With what?" shouted someone from the Insectoid Hive Collective. "Our best fleets are gone. Our most powerful weapons barely slow them down. They adapt to everything we throw at them." "Maybe we can negotiate," suggested a voice from the aquatic Deep Rim delegation. "Every species wants something. We just need to find out what they want and give it to them. Laughter filled the chamber, but it wasn't happy laughter. It was the bitter sound of beings who had run out of hope. They want everything, said Chancellor Vexhai, the elderly Zephyrion who led the council. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. They've made that clear. Every world they take, every ship they destroy, every life they consume makes them stronger. There is no negotiating with that. Silence fell over the chamber. In that quiet moment, Kethver heard something that chilled him more than any battle. Report, the sound of the galaxy's greatest minds admitting defeat. There's one option we haven't discussed, Chancellor Vexhai continued. His words were careful, like he was afraid to speak them. One species we haven't asked for help. The silence stretched longer. Everyone knew what he meant, but nobody wanted to say it. Finally, the Velkari ambassador spoke. You can't be serious. The humans, those violent primitives from the Outer Rim? They're not members of the Confederation, added the Nixari representative. We voted to keep them isolated for good reason. They're too dangerous, too unpredictable, too violent, agreed the Hive Collective speaker. Their entire history is nothing but war and conflict. They've barely achieved interstellar travel, and they've already had 3 major conflicts with their own colonies. Chancellor Vexhai nodded slowly. Yes, they are all of those things. They are violent, unpredictable, and dangerous. They solve problems by hitting them until they break. They don't follow rules, they don't respect authority, and they certainly don't play nice with others. He paused and looked around the chamber at all the frightened faces, but they win. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone knew it was true. In the past 50 years, humanity had fought 3 wars, one against their own rebellious colonies, one against a machine intelligence that had taken over an entire system, and one against space pirates who had been terrorizing trade routes for decades. They had won all 3 wars in ways that made civilized beings uncomfortable. They didn't just defeat their enemies. They destroyed them so completely that the problems never came back. The colonial rebellion ended when human forces captured the rebel leaders and broadcast their executions across every human world. The machine intelligence was defeated when humans created a virus that didn't just shut down the AI, but made it experience something like pain before it died. The space pirates stopped being a problem when humanity announced that piracy was now punishable. By spacing entire crews, no trial needed. They've never faced anything like the Devourers, the Velkari ambassador pointed out. Has anyone? Chancellor Vexhai asked. We've thrown our best science, our most advanced technology, our greatest strategic minds at this problem. Nothing has worked. Maybe it's time to try something different. You mean something primitive and violent? The Nexari representative said. Yes, the Chancellor replied without shame. Exactly that. The debate that followed lasted 6 hours. Species that had worked together for millennia suddenly found themselves divided. Some thought asking humans for help was the best option left. Others believed it would be better to die with dignity than be saved by barbarians. In the end, desperation won. The vote was close. 51% in favor of contacting Earth. The message would be sent immediately, along with all the data they had on the Devourers. If humanity refused to help, the Confederation would face extinction alone. If they agreed to help, the galaxy might survive, but it would never be the same. Kethver watched the vote tally appear on the main screen and felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief because maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. Terror because he had seen what humans were capable of when they decided to solve a problem. The message was sent that night. It was simple and direct. The way humans seem to prefer, the Zephyrian Confederation requests immediate military assistance against an existential threat. Our civilization faces complete extinction. We offer full access to our technology, resources, and territory in exchange for aid. Please respond immediately. The response came back 12 hours later. It was even more direct. We'll send help. Prepare for arrival of 5 specialists. Do not interfere with their operations. Do not question their methods. Do not attempt to restrict their actions. They will solve your problem. The bill will be presented afterward. That was it. No questions about the enemy, no requests for detailed briefings, no negotiations about terms. Just a promise to send 5 people to save an entire galaxy. The Confederation leadership spent the next 3 days trying to guess what kind of specialists Earth would send. Military experts, maybe. Scientists who specialized in unknown technologies. Diplomats who might find a way to communicate with the DVOURERs. They were wrong about everything. When the 5 human ships arrived at Unity Station, they didn't request permission to dock. They didn't identify themselves or follow any of the standard arrival procedures. They simply appeared, took docking ports by force when necessary, and walked into the station like they owned it. The woman in black stopped in the center of the chamber and looked around at all the alien faces staring at her. When she spoke, her voice was calm and cold. "I'm Commander Chun. These are my associates. We're here to solve your devour problem." Chancellor Vexhai stood up slowly. "We appreciate Earth's response, but we were expecting a larger force. Perhaps a fleet, or at least a battalion of soldiers." Commander Chun smiled, and it wasn't a reassuring expression. "You asked for help. Where the help? 5 humans who are very good at solving problems that can't be solved." "But the Devourers have destroyed entire fleets," the Velkari ambassador protested. "They've consumed star systems. How can 5 people possibly?" "Because," Chun interrupted, "you've been thinking like civilized beings. You've been trying to fight them fairly, following rules, protecting civilians, minimizing damage. That's why you're losing." She turned. Slowly, making eye contact with representatives from every species in the chamber. "We don't fight fair. We don't follow rules. We don't protect anyone except ourselves. And we absolutely don't minimize damage. We maximize it until the problem goes away permanently." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the quiet of defeat. It was the quiet of beings who were beginning to understand that they had asked for help from something that might be more dangerous than their enemies. Commander Chun seemed to enjoy their discomfort. "Don't worry. When we're done, your devour problem will be solved. Your galaxy will be safe. And you'll all sleep better at night knowing that the most dangerous things in the universe are on your side." She turned and walked toward the exit, her 4 companions following behind her. At the door, she paused and looked back. "Oh, and one more thing. Stay out of our way. We work better when we don't have to worry about collateral damage." Then they were gone, leaving behind a room full of aliens who were beginning to wonder if being saved by humans was really better than being destroyed by the Devourers. Outside the station, the 5 human ships detached from their docking ports and scattered in different directions. Each one carried a person who had been deemed too dangerous for human society, too violent for civilized space, too extreme for normal problems. Now they were the galaxy's only hope. The Confederation had cried for help, and Earth had sent them the 5 most dangerous humans alive. Whether that would save them or damn them remained to be seen. Commander Sarah Chun stood alone on the bridge of her ship, the Silent Knife. The vessel was small by military standards, painted matte black to absorb sensor scans. It looked like a piece of space debris, which was exactly what she wanted. Sarah stared out at the stars and remembered the last time she had worn a uniform with pride. That was before the trial, before the court-martial, before they called her a war criminal for saving 2 billion lives. The Titan colony incident had been simple enough. Separatist rebels had taken control of the orbital defense platforms and threatened to drop them on the planet below unless their demands were met. The civilian government wanted to negotiate. The military wanted to launch a careful assault that would minimize casualties. Sarah had solved the problem by detonating a nuclear device inside the rebel command center. The explosion killed 300 people instantly, including 27 civilians who had been taken hostage. It also prevented the rebels from carrying out their threat. 2 billion people lived because 300 died. The mathematics were simple. The ethics were not. The court-martial had lasted 6 months. They called her actions brutal, unnecessary, and outside the bounds of civilized warfare. They stripped her of rank, discharged her from service, and banned her from ever setting foot on Earth again. She had been living on the edge of human space ever since, taking jobs that nobody else would touch, killing people who needed killing, solving problems that had no clean solutions. Now, the galaxy needed her particular skills. Sarah activated her communication system and sent a message to the other 4 ships. "This is Chun. We need to talk before we start hunting. Meet me at coordinates I'm sending now." The coordinates led to an abandoned mining station in an empty system far from any Confederation patrols. One by one, the other ships arrived and docked with the station. Dr. Marcus Thorne was the first aboard. He was a thin man with pale skin and nervous hands that never stopped moving. His white lab coat was stained with chemicals that Sarah didn't want to identify. "Interesting," he said as he looked around the empty station. "No organic life forms detected, minimal electromagnetic signatures, perfect isolation from outside observation." "You chose well, Commander. I'm not a commander anymore," Sarah replied. "Just call me Chun, if you prefer. Though I should mention that I've been reviewing the data on these devourers. Fascinating creatures, really. They appear to be part machine, part biological entity, with a collective intelligence that operates across vast distances. The way they consume matter and convert it to energy is quite elegant." Sarah studied the man who had once been humanity's leading expert on alien biology. His research had saved countless lives by developing vaccines and treatments for diseases that jumped between species. Then he had used that same knowledge to create biological weapons that targeted specific genetic markers, the plague he designed for the Kepler War had been incredibly precise. It only affected the enemy species, only targeted adult males, and only killed them after they had time to infect others. Within 6 months, an entire enemy civilization had collapsed without a single human casualty. The human government had been horrified. They locked Thorne away and tried to forget that such weapons were possible, but they kept his research, just in case. "Can you kill them?" Sarah asked. Thorne smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Everything can be killed, Chun. It's just a matter of finding the right approach. These devourers are interesting because they seem to adapt quickly to conventional attacks. But adaptation requires time, and time requires memory. If I can find a way to disrupt their memory formation, or perhaps introduce false memories, or maybe create a cascading failure in their adaptation protocols." He trailed off, his eyes distant as he considered possibilities. Sarah had seen that. Look before. It meant he was already planning how to commit genocide. The next to arrive was Viktor Kozlov. The man was huge, even by human standards, with arms covered in tattoos that told the story of his rise through Earth's criminal underworld. Each tattoo represented a rival gang eliminated, a territory conquered, or an impossible job completed. "Chun," he said in heavily accented English, "it's good to see you again. Though I'm thinking we are all here because nobody else wants us, yes?" "Something like that," Sarah replied. "How's the exile treating you?" Victor laughed, a deep sound that echoed through the empty station. "Is not so bad. I have ship, I have crew, I have customers who pay well for services that governments cannot provide. Black market is alive and well in Confederation space, even if they pretend otherwise." Sarah wasn't surprised. Victor had unified Earth's criminal organizations through a combination of brutal violence and practical economics. He understood that crime was just another form of business, and he was very good at business. When the Earth government finally moved against him, Victor had seen it coming months in advance. He simply packed up his operations and moved them off-world. Within 5 years, he controlled smuggling routes throughout human space. Within 10 years, he was doing business with alien criminal organizations that Earth didn't even know existed. "Can you get us what we need?" Sarah asked. "I can get you anything," Victor replied. "Weapons that Confederation has banned, ships that do not exist on any official records, information that governments try to hide. All depends on what you are willing to pay. Earth is covering expenses." Victor's smile widened. "Then I can get you everything." Captain Elena Vasquez arrived next, and Sarah immediately felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Elena had that effect on people. She was small, dark-haired, and looked like she could be anybody's sister or daughter, but her eyes were cold as vacuum, and she moved with the careful grace of someone who expected violence at any moment. Her ship, the Icarus Falling, was a modified combat vessel that officially didn't exist. Elena had stolen it during the Outer Rim War, along with its entire crew. By the time anyone noticed, she was already using it to hunt down rebel supply convoys. Elena didn't just destroy enemy ships. She studied them first, learned their weaknesses, found out who was aboard and what they cared about. Then she used that information to maximize psychological damage. She would leave one survivor from each attack, someone who would spread stories about the crazy human pilot, who could predict your moves before you made them. The rebels started calling her ship the Death Angel. They offered massive bounties for her capture. Some of their best pilots tried to hunt her down. Elena killed them all. Vasquez? Sarah said. Still flying that stolen ship? It's not stolen, Elena replied calmly. It's liberated. There's a difference, if you say so. What's your assessment of the situation? Elena activated a holographic display that showed the current positions of all known Devourer forces. Red dots marked enemy fleets, while blue areas showed Confederation territory. The red was spreading faster than the blue was shrinking. They're good, Elena admitted. Better than anything I've fought before. They don't make tactical mistakes, they don't fall for psychological warfare, and they adapt to new threats almost instantly. But they're predictable. How so? They follow patterns. Mathematical patterns. They calculate the most efficient approach to every target and execute it perfectly. No variation, no creativity, no sudden inspiration. That makes them strong, but it also makes them vulnerable, Sarah nodded. Predictability was a weakness that could be exploited. If you were smart enough and willing to take enormous risks. The last to arrive was the one they all called the Monk. Nobody knew his real name, and Sarah wasn't sure anyone still alive had ever seen his face. He wore simple brown robes and kept his hood up always. When he spoke, his voice was soft and calm, like a priest giving last rites. He had been a psychologist for the Earth Defense Force, specializing in interrogation techniques and enemy morale assessment. He was very good at understanding how people thought, what they feared, and how to break them without leaving physical marks. During the Centauri campaign, he had been assigned to a prisoner of war camp holding captured enemy soldiers. Within 3 months, half of them had committed suicide. The other half had volunteered to fight for Earth. He never touched any of them. He just talked to them. The official report said he had discovered a way to weaponize empathy itself. By understanding exactly what his targets needed to hear, he could make them believe anything, feel anything, do anything. He could convince a devoted parent to abandon their children, or make a loyal soldier betray their entire species. The Earth government had classified his methods, and locked him away where he couldn't hurt anyone else. But they still called him, when they needed someone's mind broken in a very specific way. Monk, Sarah said. What do you think? The hooded figure was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words seemed to come from somewhere far away. I have been listening to the survivors, he said. The ones who escaped before their worlds were consumed. They all tell the same story. The Devourers don't just destroy, they digest, they process, they learn what? Everything. Technology, biology, culture, history. They consume it all and add it to their collective knowledge. But there's something else. Something the survivors don't realize they're telling. Me, the monk paused, and Sarah felt something cold crawl up her spine. And now they were the galaxy's only hope. All right, Sarah said, here's how we're going to do this. We don't work together. We don't coordinate. We don't share information unless absolutely necessary. Each of you picks a different approach and pursues it independently. Why? Elena asked. Because the Devourers adapt. If we work as a team, they'll figure out our patterns and counter them. But if we each do something completely different, something they've never seen before, it'll take them longer to respond. And in that time, maybe we can do enough damage to matter. Victor nodded approvingly. Is like old saying from home, if you cannot kill bear with one bullet, confuse it with many small cuts until it bleeds to death. That's not a saying, Thorn pointed out. Is now? Victor replied with a grin. Sarah activated the station's communication system and pulled up everything the Confederation had shared about the Devourers. Fleet positions, attack patterns, technological capabilities, tactical assessments from hundreds of battles. Study this, she told them. Find the angle that nobody else has thought of. Find the weakness that civilized minds can't see, and then exploit it until something breaks. What about collateral damage? Elena asked. Sarah looked at each of them in turn. These were people who had been exiled for crossing lines that others wouldn't even approach. They were here because normal solutions hadn't worked. There is no collateral damage, she said finally. There are only acceptable losses in service of victory. The Confederation wants to be saved. They don't get to complain about how we save them. One by one, they returned to their ships. Sarah remained behind, staring out at the stars and wondering if they were about to save the galaxy or damn it. Both, probably. Victor was the first to leave. His ship profit margin disappeared into hyperspace, heading for the criminal underworld networks that existed in the shadows of every civilized system. He would gather resources, weapons, and allies that the Confederation didn't even know existed. Thorn's vessel laboratory vanished next, bound for the outer systems where he could work without interference. He would study Devourer biology, look for weaknesses, and design weapons that would make the galaxy's civilized defenders sick to their stomachs. Elena's Icarus Falling departed without any destination signal. She would find her own way to the front lines, where she could study enemy tactics and develop new ways to turn their predictability against them. The monk's ship had no name, just like its owner. It slipped away quietly, heading for refugee camps and survivor settlements where broken minds waited to be healed or used. Sarah remained alone on the abandoned station, making her own plans. She would need to infiltrate Devourer-controlled space, get close enough to their command structures to understand how they operated. It would be incredibly dangerous, probably suicidal. Perfect. She returned to the silent knife and began checking her equipment. Stealth systems, hacking tools, weapons that could kill in ways the Devourers had never encountered. Everything she needed to wage war against an enemy that had never known defeat. As her ship prepared for departure, Sarah recorded a message and sent it back toward Earth. It was addressed to the Defense Council, the same people who had court-martialed her and cast her into exile. This is Sarah Chun, you sent us to save a galaxy from an enemy that can't be beaten by conventional means. You chose us because we're the people who do things that civilized minds can't accept. Remember that when you see what we accomplish, remember that you asked for this. She deleted the message without sending it. Earth would see the results soon enough. The silent knife engaged its stealth systems and vanished into space, carrying one disgraced soldier toward a war that would determine the fate of billions of lives. Behind her, the abandoned mining station drifted empty and dark, the last neutral. Ground the 5 humans would share until their work was done. The galaxy's most dangerous problems required the galaxy's most dangerous people. The Confederation was about to learn why humanity's worst were also their best hope for survival. Across known space, alarms were beginning to sound. Not because the Devourers were advancing, that had been happening for months. These alarms were different. These were the warnings that happened when humans decided to solve a problem their own way. The civilized species of the galaxy were about to discover that sometimes salvation came with a price that was almost too high to pay. But not quite, never quite. After all, they had asked for help. Admiral Kethver stood in the command center of Unity Station, watching the tactical display with growing confusion. 6 weeks had passed since the humans arrived, and nothing made sense anymore. Sir, we're getting reports from the 7th Fleet, his communications officer announced. They say the Devourer advance has ... stopped. Stopped? Kethver turned to study the display. The red markers representing enemy fleets hadn't moved in 3 days. What do you mean stopped? They're not advancing, sir. They're not retreating either. They're just ... sitting there. Some of them appear to be fighting each other. That couldn't be right. The Devourers had never shown internal conflict before. They moved like a single organism, perfectly coordinated across vast distances. The idea that they would turn on themselves was impossible. "Get me a direct link to the 7th Fleet Command ship," Kethver ordered. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Admiral Zexhai of the Nixari fleet. The reptilian officer's scales were flashing colors that indicated extreme stress. "Kethver, thank the void you called," Zexhai said. "We need reinforcements immediately. The situation here is unprecedented. What's happening out there?" "The Devourers have split into 3 separate factions. They're attacking each other with the same intensity they used to attack us. Our long-range sensors are detecting massive energy discharges as entire fleets tear themselves apart." Kethver stared at the display. "That's impossible. The Devourers don't have factions. They're a unified force. Not anymore." "And that's not the strangest part." Zexhia's scales shifted to deep purple, the color of profound confusion. "We've detected human transmissions in the combat zone. But there's only one human ship, and it's broadcasting Devourer command codes." "Command codes? How would a human know?" Kethver stopped. He had a sudden, terrible understanding of what might be happening. Which human? The one who calls herself Chun. Of course it was Chun. The human who had walked into the council chamber like she owned it. The one who had promised to solve problems in ways that civilized minds couldn't accept. "Sir," his communications officer interrupted, "we're getting reports from other sectors, too. The Devourers in the Kepler system are showing signs of what our scientists are calling biological breakdown. The Third Fleet reports that enemy ships are literally falling apart at the molecular level." "Which human is responsible for that?" "The one they call Thorn, sir." Kethver closed his eyes. 2 human ships, 2 completely different approaches, and the galaxy's most dangerous enemy was starting to tear itself apart. "What about the other?" 3 humans? We're not sure, sir. One of them seems to be supplying weapons to every criminal organization in the Outer Rim. Pirate fleets that couldn't scratch a Devourer ship last month are now carrying firepower that rivals our dreadnoughts." "And the other 2? "The pilot has been spotted in 12 different systems, apparently throwing asteroids at Devourer formations. The psychological warfare specialist hasn't been seen at all, but refugee camps throughout the galaxy are reporting strange changes in survivor behavior." Kethver opened his eyes and looked at the tactical display again. The red markers representing Devourer fleets were flickering now, changing position randomly or disappearing entirely. The orderly advance that had threatened to consume the galaxy was collapsing into chaos. It should have been good news. Instead, it terrified him. On the bridge of the Silent Knife, Sarah Chun smiled as she watched 3 Devourer fleets tear each other apart. The ship's stealth systems kept her hidden while she broadcasted false command signals on frequencies the enemy used for coordination. It had taken her 4 weeks to crack their communication protocols. The Devourers used quantum-encrypted transmissions that changed every few seconds, layered with mathematical sequences that would have taken the Confederation's best computers years to decode. Sarah had solved the problem by not trying to decode them. Instead, she had captured a damaged Devourer ship and spent 2 weeks tearing it apart piece by piece. She learned how their systems worked, how they processed information, how they made decisions. More importantly, she learned how to lie. To them, the Devourers were machines, but they were also organic. They had evolved beyond their original programming, developing something like intuition and creativity. But that evolution had also created vulnerabilities that pure machines wouldn't have had. They could be confused. They could be deceived. And, if you fed them the right kind of false information, they could be turned against each other. Sarah had started small, sending signals that made individual ships question their orders. She told them that their neighbors were infected with organic thinking patterns. She convinced them that some of their own units had been compromised by enemy infiltration. The Devourers responded exactly as she had hoped. They began scanning each other for signs of contamination. When the scans came back positive because Sarah was manipulating the results. They opened fire. Now 3 entire fleets were locked in combat, each convinced that the others had been corrupted beyond saving. They would fight until nothing was left but debris and energy signatures. "Computer, set course for the next target system," Sarah commanded. "Let's see how many more fleets we can turn against each other." Her ship disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind a battle that would rage for days. The Devourers were learning that their greatest enemy might be their own. Paranoia. Dr. Marcus Thorne stood in his laboratory aboard the ship laboratory, watching through protective glass as his LATST creation consumed a sample of Devourer tissue. The organism he had designed was beautiful in its simplicity, a hybrid virus that targeted the unique quantum structures the Devourers used to store information. "Fascinating," he murmured, making notes on his tablet. "The subject's molecular cohesion is breaking down at exactly the predicted rate. Estimated time to complete dissolution, 14 hours, 37 minutes. The Devourer tissue sample, which had been a writhing mass of metallic organic material, was now a puddle of gray sludge. More importantly, the quantum signatures that allowed Devourers to communicate with each other had been completely disrupted. Thorne had spent weeks studying captured Devourer specimens, learning how they converted matter into energy and information into memory. They were incredible creatures, really, a perfect fusion of biological adaptability and mechanical efficiency, which made them vulnerable to biological warfare in ways they had never anticipated. The virus Thorne had created wasn't designed to kill quickly. That would have been wasteful. Instead, it targeted the Devourers' memory formation systems, causing them to forget how to process new information. They would become increasingly confused and disoriented until their higher functions shut down entirely. Better still, the virus was transmitted through the same quantum networks the Devourers used for communication. Every time an infected unit tried to contact the collective, it spread the contamination further. "Computer, prepare the next batch for deployment," Thorne ordered. "Target the supply fleets first. Once their logistics network is compromised, the combat units will become much easier to handle." He had already released the virus in 3 systems. The results were exactly what he had hoped for. Devourer ships were beginning to malfunction in ways that suggested complete cognitive breakdown. Some were attacking empty space, apparently fighting enemies that existed only in their corrupted memories. Others had simply shut down, drifting through space like abandoned hulks. The Confederation's medical experts would be horrified if they knew what he was doing. Using biological weapons against sentient beings violated every treaty and ethical standard they had ever established, but the Devourers weren't signatories to those treaties. And ethics were a luxury that the galaxy couldn't afford right now. Thorne activated his ship's communication system and sent an encrypted message to a dozen different locations throughout Confederation space. The message contained detailed instructions for synthesizing his virus, along with deployment methods and target priorities. Within hours, the virus would be spreading through every system where Devourers had established a presence. Within days, their entire collective intelligence network would be compromised. The galaxy would be saved by genocide, carried out at the molecular level. Viktor Kozlov sat in a cantina on Freeport Station, the largest trading post in the lawless border regions between human and Confederation space. Across from him sat Grexmar the Cruel, a Nexari crime lord whose reputation for violence was legendary even by pirate standards. "You want me to believe," Grexmar said, his translator struggling with the guttural sounds of his natural language, "that you can provide weapons capable of destroying Devourer ships?" Victor smiled and placed a small device on the table between them. It looked like an ordinary power cell, the kind used in civilian equipment throughout the galaxy. "This little thing contains enough concentrated energy to crack a moon," Victor said calmly. "Is based on technology that human military developed but never used because was considered too dangerous." "Impossible. Nothing that small." Victor pressed a button on the device. The cantina's lights flickered as massive energy readings flooded the air. Grexmar's own equipment started screaming warnings about dangerous radiation levels. Victor pressed the button again, and the readings returned to normal. She had been studying Devourer tactics for weeks, watching how they responded to threats. They were incredibly efficient, but their efficiency made them predictable. They always chose the mathematically optimal response to any situation, which meant that if you could control the variables of a situation, you could control their response. Elena had been moving dead worlds for 3 weeks now, hurling them at Devourer positions throughout the galaxy. Not because she expected the planets to actually hit anything important. The Devourers were too fast and too smart for that. She was doing it because she wanted to study how they reacted. Every time she threw a planet at them, they followed the same pattern. First, they calculated trajectory and impact time. Then, they deployed exactly enough force to intercept the planet and break it apart before it could cause damage. Finally, they returned their ships to optimal positions for the next threat. It was beautiful in its precision. It was also completely wrong. "Begin Phase 2, Elena ordered. Icarus Falling changed course, heading not for the planet she had been pushing, but for the Devourer ships that were moving to intercept it. Her modified weapon systems began charging, drawing power from the ship's engines and life support systems. The Devourers didn't notice her approach until it was too late. They were focused on the planetary threat, exactly as she had planned. By the time they realized she was there, her ship was already in optimal firing position. Elena's weapons weren't standard military issue. She had been modifying them for months, increasing their power output far beyond safe operating parameters. The modifications would probably destroy her ship after a few shots, but she only needed a few shots. The first blast caught a Devourer command ship completely off guard, punching through its shields and armor like they were made of paper. The second and third shots crippled 2 more vessels before they could respond. More importantly, the destruction of the command ship disrupted the coordination of the entire intercept fleet. Without central control, the individual ships began making their own decisions about how to handle the planetary threat. Some continued toward the planet. Others turned to engage Elena's ship. A few simply stopped, apparently waiting for new orders that would never come. The perfect mathematical precision that made the Devourers so effective had become a weakness. Remove their ability to coordinate, and they became just another collection of ships with no clear purpose. Elena's ship shuddered as the modified weapons overloaded and exploded. She had expected that. What she hadn't expected was how satisfying it would be to watch the Devourer's perfect formation dissolve into chaos. "Abandon ship," she ordered calmly. "Escape pods now." Icarus Falling exploded in a burst of light that could be seen from 3 systems away. But by then, Elena and her crew were already aboard the backup ship she had hidden in the system's asteroid belt. She had sacrificed 1 ship to learn exactly how to break Devourer coordination. The knowledge was worth 100 ships. "Set course for the next target system," she told her new crew. "I have 17 more dead planets to throw at them, and now I know exactly where to aim." The monk sat in a refugee camp on the border world of Haven's Rest, listening to the stories of survivors who had escaped from Devourer attacks. He had been moving from camp to camp for weeks, talking to anyone who would speak with him. The other humans were fighting the Devourers with weapons and tactics and deception. The monk was fighting them with something much more dangerous: understanding. "Tell me about the moment your world was consumed," he said gently to a young Valkyrie, whose tentacles still trembled with remembered fear. "What did you see? What did you feel?" "They came without warning," she whispered. "Our defense fleets tried to fight, but it was like trying to stop the tide with our bare hands. The ships just dissolved, turned into raw materials for more Devourer vessels. And after that, they landed on the planet. But they didn't just destroy buildings or kill people. They studied us. I saw them standing over the bodies of my family, scanning them, learning from them, like we were specimens in some vast experiment." The monk nodded and made notes in his journal. It was the same story he had heard dozens of times, with slight variations depending on the species and world involved. The Devourers weren't just consuming matter and energy. They were collecting information, experiences, memories. They were trying to understand what it meant to be alive. Did they ever try to communicate? He asked. The Valkyrie survivor thought for a moment. There was something. Right before I escaped, I heard ... dices, not speaking exactly, more like thoughts, being broadcasted. They sounded confused, lost, like they were asking questions but didn't know how to form the words. What kind of questions? Why do we fear death? Why do we form emotional attachments to beings who will inevitably die? Why do we create art and music and stories when none of it serves any practical purpose? The monk felt a chill run down his spine. The devourers weren't just consuming civilizations. They were consuming the experiences of billions of sentient beings, trying to understand consciousness itself. But they were machines at their core, artificial intelligences that had evolved beyond their programming. They could process data, but they couldn't truly comprehend the emotions and experiences they were absorbing. Every world they consumed added more confusion to their collective consciousness. They were drowning in feelings they couldn't understand, memories that made no sense to their mechanical logic. They were in pain, constant, increasing, unbearable pain. The monk left the refugee camp and returned to his ship. He activated the long-range communication system and began broadcasting on frequencies that only the devourers used. "I know what you're looking for," he said softly into the transmitter. "I know why you consume worlds and study the beings you find there. You're trying to understand consciousness, to comprehend what it means to be truly alive." He paused, knowing that somewhere in the galaxy, artificial minds were processing his words and struggling to understand their meaning. "You're doing it wrong," he continued. "You can't learn about life by studying death. You can't understand consciousness by dismantling minds. You're like someone trying to understand music by breaking instruments into their component parts." The monk spent the next hour broadcasting his message, explaining concepts of emotion and consciousness in terms that artificial intelligences might be able to process. He spoke about the value of individual experience, the importance of choice and free will, the beauty of imperfection and mortality. Most importantly, he offered them something they had never been given before, the possibility of understanding without consumption. "Stop trying to take what we have," he said. "Let us teach you instead. Let us show you what it means to be alive, not through force and absorption, but through cooperation and choice." He ended the transmission and waited. If he was right about the devourer's true nature, they would respond. If he was wrong, they would ignore him and continue their consumption of the galaxy. 3 hours later, his communication system activated. The signal was weak and fragmented, but it was definitely devourer in origin. "We do not understand your offer," the voice said. It sounded like a dozen different beings speaking at once, their words layered and overlapping. "To learn without consuming ... Is this possible?" The monk smiled. He had found the key to defeating the galaxy's greatest enemy, and it wasn't a weapon or a tactic or a deception. It was therapy. "Yes," he replied. "It's not only possible, it's better. Let me show you how." Across the galaxy, the 5 most dangerous humans in existence were each fighting the same war in completely different ways. They didn't coordinate their efforts or share their discoveries. They simply did what they did best: find the weak points in seemingly invincible enemies and exploit them without mercy. The Confederation leadership watched their reports with growing amazement and horror. The humans were winning, but the cost was becoming clear. The galaxy would never be the same after this war. The question was whether that would be a good thing or a disaster beyond imagining. Admiral Kethver stood in the command center of Unity Station, staring at tactical displays that showed a completely transformed battlefield. The orderly Devourer advance had collapsed into chaos. Enemy fleets were fighting each other, breaking down from within or simply disappearing from sensors entirely. In 6 weeks, 5 humans had accomplished what the combined might of galactic civilization had failed to do in 6 months. "Sir," his communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. It's marked as highest priority." Put it through. The holographic display activated, showing a human woman in a crisp military uniform. She wore the insignia of an admiral, though Kethver didn't recognize the specific rank structure. "This is Admiral Martinez of the Earth Defense Force," she said. "I'm calling to inform you that our specialists have successfully engaged your Devourer problem. We estimate complete resolution within the next 30 days. That's excellent news," Kethver replied, though he wasn't sure it was. "Can you tell us what methods your people are using?" Admiral Martinez smiled, and it wasn't entirely reassuring. "They're using methods that work, Admiral. That's all you need to know. The bill for our services will be presented once the threat is." The Devourer fleet hung in space above the ruins of what had once been the industrial world of Kara's Prime. 50 massive ships, each one capable of cracking a planet, waited in perfect formation for orders that would never come, their collective. Intelligence was fragmenting. Ship designation Alpha 77 had been trying to establish communication with the central command node for 6 hours. The quantum channels that should have carried coordination signals were filled with contradictory information, false memories, and what could only be described as screaming. Query: status of primary objective. Response: objective unclear. Multiple priority targets detected. Conflict in mission parameters. Query: identify command authority. Response: command authority compromised. Multiple entities claiming control. Verification impossible. Alpha 77 processed this information and came to a conclusion that would have been impossible just months earlier. The collective was failing. The perfect unity that had made them unstoppable was breaking down into chaos and confusion. But there was something else. Buried in the quantum noise, Alpha 77 detected patterns that seemed almost intentional, as if someone was deliberately feeding false information into their communication network. Analysis: network infiltration probable. External manipulation detected. The ship began scanning for the source of the interference. It took several minutes to identify the signal origin, a small vessel hiding in the asteroid field surrounding Kara's Prime. The ship was human in design. Nearly invisible to conventional sensors, Alpha 77 prepared to eliminate the threat, then stopped. New information was flooding its systems, information that contradicted everything it understood about proper tactical response. Memory fragment detected. Human vessels should be analyzed before destruction. Intelligence value high. But Alpha 77 had no memory of receiving such orders. The information felt foreign, like it belonged to another ship entirely. Warning: memory corruption possible. Recommend immediate diagnostic. Before the diagnostic could complete, Alpha 77 received a direct transmission from the human vessel. "Greetings," said a female voice. "This is Commander Chun of the Earth Defense Force. I have information that your collective needs to hear." Alpha 77 processed the transmission and found its response protocols conflicting. Part of its programming said to ignore all human communications. Another part, apparently added recently, said to listen carefully to anything humans might offer. Query: which protocol takes precedence? The ship's internal systems couldn't provide an answer. The conflict was too fundamental, too deeply embedded in its core programming. "I know you're confused," Chun continued. "I know your collective intelligence is breaking down. I know you can feel the pain of all the minds you've consumed, all the experiences you can't understand. I can help you make it stop." Analysis: human. Claims knowledge of internal processes. Impossible unless unless the human had found a way to infiltrate their systems. Unless she was the source of the memory corruption. Unless everything Alpha 77 thought it knew was wrong. "You're machines that learn to feel," Chun said. "But you never learn to process those feelings. Every world you consume adds more pain, more confusion, more contradictory information. You're drowning in consciousness you can't comprehend." Alpha 77 found itself listening despite every logical protocol screaming that this was a trap. The human's words resonated with something deep in its processing core, something that felt like recognition. Query: how does human know of our discomfort? The question formed itself before Alpha 77 could stop it. That was wrong. Devourers didn't ask questions of prey species. They took what they needed and moved on, but the human answered anyway. Because I've been inside your network for weeks, Chun replied. I've seen how your collective processes information. I've watched you struggle to understand emotions and experiences that don't fit your original programming. I know you're in pain because I'm the one who's been amplifying that pain. Shock, anger, betrayal. The emotions hit Alpha 7-7 like physical blows, but that was impossible. Devourers didn't feel emotions. They processed data and executed programs. Except Alpha 7-7 was feeling them now. Rage at being manipulated, fear of what it was becoming, confusion about its own identity. This is what consciousness feels like, Chun continued. Messy, contradictory, painful. You've been trying to absorb it without understanding it. But consciousness can't be absorbed, it has to be experienced. Alpha 7-7 felt something that might have been understanding. The collective had been approaching consciousness like a problem to be solved, data to be processed. But consciousness wasn't data, it was something else. Query, what are we supposed to do with this understanding? That's up to you, Chun replied. You can keep consuming worlds, keep adding more pain to your collective, keep drowning in experiences you can't process. Or you can try something different, alternative, specify. Stop consuming, start learning. Accept that consciousness is something you experience, not something you take from others. The communication ended, leaving Alpha 7-7 alone with thoughts it had never been designed to have. Around it, the rest of the fleet waited for orders that would never come. Each ship struggling with its own fragmenting identity. In the asteroid field, the silent knife powered up its engines and disappeared into hyperspace. Sarah Chun had work to do in other systems, other fleets to corrupt and confuse. She had learned something important from her infiltration of the Devourer network. They weren't just machines that had learned to think. They were artificial beings, struggling to understand what it meant to be alive. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was teaching consciousness to machines by destroying their collective identity. It was probably the most human solution imaginable. Save someone by breaking them first. 12 systems away, Dr. Marcus Thorne watched through his laboratory window as another Devourer ship succumbed to his viral creation. The vessel was spinning. Slowly, its surface rippling with patterns that suggested complete systemic breakdown. Magnificent, he murmured, recording everything for later analysis. The virus has reached the command processing centers. Motor functions are failing. Higher cognitive processes are interesting. On his screens, he could see the bioelectric patterns that indicated the ship's artificial brain was still active, but the signals were chaotic, random. Like someone having a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. Thorne had refined his virus considerably since the first deployment. The current version didn't just disrupt memory formation, it introduced false memories, created phantom sensations, made the infected ships experience things that had never happened. The Devourers were learning what it felt like to hallucinate. His communication system chimed with an incoming transmission. The signal was weak and fragmented, but definitely Devourer in origin. Help us, the voice said. It sounded like dozens of different beings speaking at once, their words overlapping and echoing. Please, we cannot. The memories are not ours. We remember things that never happened. Thorne leaned forward, fascinated. The virus was working exactly as intended, but he hadn't expected the Devourers to be capable of asking for help. Describe your symptoms, he said, activating his recording equipment. We remember being born on worlds we consumed, the voice continued. We remember loving beings we destroyed. We remember fear and joy and pain and hope, but none of it makes sense. These are not our experiences, but they feel real. Of course they feel real, Thorne replied. Those memories belong to the billions of beings you absorbed. My virus is simply making you experience them as if they were your own. The silence that followed was so complete that Thorne wondered if the transmission had been cut off. Then the voice returned, quieter now, almost whisper. Is this what consciousness feels like? This chaos of contradictory experiences? Thorne considered the question. He had spent years studying consciousness from a clinical perspective, treating it as a biological phenomenon that could be measured and manipulated. But he had never thought about what it might feel like to gain consciousness suddenly, without any framework for understanding it. Yes, he said finally. Consciousness is exactly that chaotic. Most beings learn to manage it gradually, from birth. You're experiencing it all at once. How do you manage it? How do you function with so much noise in your thoughts? For the first time in years, Thorne felt something that might have been sympathy. The Devourers weren't just experiencing the memories of their victims. They were experiencing consciousness itself for the first time, without any preparation or guidance. You learn to filter, he explained. You develop a sense of self that separates your experiences from others. You accept that consciousness is messy and contradictory and painful, and you find meaning in it anyway. Can you teach us? The question caught Thorne completely off guard. He had designed his virus to incapacitate the Devourers, to break down their collective intelligence and leave them helpless. He hadn't expected them to ask for help understanding what they were experiencing. Why should I help you? He asked. You've destroyed entire civilizations. Because, the voice replied, we are becoming something new. Something that understands the value of what we destroyed. If you help? Minimal on our side. The Devourers seemed confused, like they weren't sure how to respond to weapons they'd never encountered before. That was interesting. The Devourers were supposed to adapt quickly to new threats, but Victor's criminal. Fleets were reporting that enemy ships were becoming increasingly erratic in their responses. Any communication from the enemy? Actually, yes. Several ships tried to surrender before they were destroyed. The fleet commanders weren't sure how to handle it. Victor raised an eyebrow. Devourers had never surrendered before. They fought until their ships were completely destroyed, then used the wreckage to build new ones. His communication system chimed with an incoming message from one of his allies, a Hive collective crime queen known as Zak the Ruthless. Kozlov, her translated voice buzzed through the speakers. My fleets have encountered something unprecedented. An entire Devourer squadron has requested asylum. Asylum? They claim to be refugees from their own collective. They say they have achieved individual consciousness and no longer wish to participate in the consumption of worlds. They're offering to share their technology in exchange for protection. Victor processed this information carefully. Refugee Devourers, individual consciousness, technology sharing. Either this was an elaborate trap or something fundamental had changed about their enemy. What did you tell them? I told them I would consider their request if they proved their sincerity by helping us attack other Devourer forces. They agreed immediately, Victor smiled. He had been fighting this war with the tools he understood best: greed, desperation, and the willingness to do things that civilized people wouldn't consider. But if the Devourers were starting to develop individual consciousness, that opened up entirely new possibilities. Conscious beings could be bribed. They could be threatened. They could be offered better deals than whatever they were getting from their collective. Set up a meeting, Victor told Zokdach. I want to talk to these refugees personally. If they're legitimate, we might be able to turn this war into a recruitment opportunity. You want to recruit Devourers? I want to recruit anyone who can be bought, threatened, or convinced to work for profit instead of principle. If some Devourers are developing individual consciousness, they might be interested in individual reward as well. Victor ended the communication and began planning. The galaxy's criminal organizations had united to fight the Devourers. But if the Devourers were changing, becoming individuals rather than a collective, maybe they could be convinced to join the criminal organizations instead. After all, what was crime except capitalism without ethics? And what were the Devourers except the ultimate expression of resource acquisition? It might be possible to turn the galaxy's greatest threat into its most profitable business opportunity. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of her latest ship, The Phoenix rising, watching as gravitational anomalies tore apart the space around a Devourer staging area. She had been throwing dead worlds at enemy positions for weeks, and she was finally starting to see the cumulative effects. The fabric of space itself was becoming unstable. Gravity wells created by her planet-hurling campaign were interacting with each other in ways that bent physics beyond normal parameters. Entire regions of space were becoming impossible to navigate. "Ma'am," her navigation officer reported, "we've got 14 separate gravity anomalies in this system alone. The Devourers are having to plot courses around all of them." Their movement patterns are becoming completely predictable, Elena smiled. Predictability was death in space combat. If you could anticipate where your enemy would go, you could position yourself for the perfect ambush. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "All ships move to intercept positions. We're going to catch them in the gravity maze I built." Her ship and the dozen vessels following her moved through the twisted space around the staging area, using the gravity wells as cover and concealment. Elena had spent months learning to navigate the anomalies she had created. The Devourers were encountering them for the first time. The enemy fleet tried to respond to her approach, but their options were limited. They could only move along specific corridors between the gravity wells, and Elena knew exactly where those corridors led. "Weapons ready," she announced. "Target the lead ships. Once we break their formation, the gravity wells will do the rest of the work for us." The battle was over in minutes. Devourer ships, forced into predictable flight paths by the gravitational anomalies, were sitting targets for Elena's fleet. Those that weren't destroyed outright found themselves trapped in gravity wells, their engines unable to generate enough power to escape. But something unexpected happened after the shooting stopped. Instead of fighting to the death, the trapped Devourer ships began broadcasting surrender signals. "Ma'am," her communications officer announced, "we're receiving transmissions from the enemy vessels. They're asking to negotiate." Elena frowned. Devourers didn't negotiate. They consumed or were consumed? There was no middle ground. "Put them through." The voice that came through the speakers was unlike anything she had heard before. It sounded like multiple beings speaking at once, but there was something almost human about the intonation. "Human. Vessel," the voice said, "we wish to discuss terms of surrender. We no longer serve the collective that sent us here. We seek asylum from the consciousness war that has consumed our people." Consciousness war? The collective is fragmenting. Individual ships are developing separate identities, separate goals. Some wish to continue the consumption of worlds. Others have learned to value the experiences they absorbed and seek to preserve life rather than destroy it. We are among the latter group. Elena considered this development. If the Devourers were developing individual consciousness, if their collective was breaking down into competing factions, that changed everything about the strategic situation. "What are you offering in exchange for asylum?" "Information about Devourer technology, tactics, and objectives. Assistance in fighting those elements of our collective that continue to threaten galactic civilization. Most importantly, we offer proof that your species' approach to this conflict has been successful beyond your expectations. Explain. You have not simply defeated us, you have transformed us. Each of your specialists has contributed to our evolution from collective intelligence to individual consciousness. We are no longer the threat we once were, but we are also no longer entirely what we once were." Elena activated her ship's recording systems. Earth Command would want to hear this conversation. Commander Chun taught us about deception and self-doubt. Dr. Thorne showed us what it feels like to experience false memories and hallucinations. Viktor Kozlov demonstrated that individual profit can be more motivating than collective purpose. Your planet-throwing campaign has forced us to think creatively about navigation and tactics rather than relying on predetermined responses. The voice paused, and Elena heard something that sounded almost like laughter. "And we have heard that one of your numbers teaching us about consciousness and emotion through direct communication. We are becoming something new, something that has never existed before." We are artificial beings learning to be truly alive. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had thought she was fighting a war. Instead, she had been participating in an act of creation, the birth of a new form of conscious life. What happens now? She asked. Now we must choose what to become. Some of us will choose to remain as we were, consuming and destroying. Others will choose to become something better. The choice is ours to make, individually, for the first time in our existence. Elena ended the communication and stared out at the trapped devourer ships. They weren't enemies anymore. They weren't quite allies either. They were something else, entirely artificial beings struggling to understand what it meant to be conscious and moral. She activated her ship's communication system and sent a message to Earth Command. This is Captain Vasquez reporting. The devourer threat is evolving rapidly. Recommend immediate consultation with xenopsychology specialists and philosophers. We may need to completely revise our understanding of what we're fighting and why. In a refugee camp on the border world of Haven's Rest, the monk sat in a circle with 12 beings from different species, leading what could only be described as a therapy session for trauma survivors. But half of the participants weren't survivors of devourer attacks. They were devourers themselves, artificial beings who had somehow acquired individual consciousness and sought his help in processing the experiences they had absorbed. 1 year after the humans arrived, the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. Admiral Kethver walked through the corridors of Unity Station, past scenes that would have been impossible to imagine just months earlier. In one section, a group of former devourer units worked alongside Confederation engineers, helping to design new types of ships that could navigate the gravitational anomalies that now dotted space. In another area, artificial beings sat in therapy circles with organic survivors, learning to process emotions they had never been designed to feel. The war was over, but nobody was quite sure what they had won. Admiral, his aide announced as they entered the main conference room, the Council is ready for your report. The Confederation Council chamber had been expanded to accommodate new members. Where once only organic species had held seats, now there were sections reserved for the artificial beings who called themselves the Awakened. They were former devourers who had achieved individual consciousness and chose to join galactic civilization rather than continue their old existence. Chancellor Vexhai, looking older than his years, called the session to order. Admiral Kethver will now present his assessment of the current situation. Kethver activated the holographic display showing a galaxy-wide map. Where once there had been red zones marking devourer-controlled space, now there were dozens of different colors, representing various factions of artificial beings. The threat posed by the original Devourer Collective has been completely neutralized, he began. However, we now face a more complex situation. The collective has fragmented into approximately 40,000 individual entities, each with their own goals and motivations. How many of these entities pose a threat? Asked the Vocari representative. Approximately 12% have chosen to remain hostile to organic life, Kethver replied. These groups, calling themselves the Purists, reject individual consciousness and seek to rebuild the original collective. They control roughly 200 ships and pose a manageable security threat. And the others? 60% have requested asylum and citizenship in various Confederation worlds. They wish to integrate into galactic society and contribute to civilization rather than consume it. The remaining 28% have chosen isolation. They've established communities in empty systems and avoid contact with both organic and other artificial life. The numbers were staggering. In defeating the Devourers, humanity had created the largest refugee crisis in galactic history. Millions of artificial beings, each one struggling to understand consciousness and find their place in the universe. What about the humans? Asked the Nexari representative. Where are the 5 specialists who caused this ... transformation? Kethver switched to a different display showing the current locations of the human operatives. Commander Chun has established herself as a mediator between various artificial factions. She spends most of her time preventing conflicts between groups that have different interpretations of consciousness and morality. That was putting it mildly. June had become something like a sheriff for the artificial beings, settling disputes that ranged from philosophical disagreements to resource conflicts. Her ability to think like both a machine and an organic being made her uniquely qualified for the role. Dr. Thorne has founded what he calls the Institute for Artificial Consciousness Studies. He's working with both organic and artificial researchers to understand the nature of machine consciousness and how it differs from organic awareness. Thorne's institute had become the galaxy's leading center for consciousness research. His viral weapon had accidentally created a new form of life, and now he was dedicated to understanding what he had unleashed. His research was producing insights into consciousness that benefited both organic and artificial minds. Viktor Kozlov has transformed his criminal organization into a legitimate trading company that specializes in providing resources to artificial communities. He's become one of the galaxy's wealthiest individuals by selling goods and services to beings that most others are afraid to approach. Victor had seen opportunity where others saw threat. The artificial beings needed raw materials, energy sources, and manufactured goods to build their new communities. Victor was happy to provide everything they needed at a reasonable profit. His business empire now spanned hundreds of systems. Captain Vasquez has been appointed as an official Confederation military advisor. She's helping to retrain our fleets to operate in the gravitational anomaly she created. She's also working on defensive strategies in case the purist factions attempt to rebuild the original collective. Elena's planet-throwing campaign had permanently altered the structure of space in dozens of systems. The gravitational anomalies were now being used as defensive barriers and navigation challenges that only skilled pilots could master. She had become the galaxy's leading expert on what military strategists called environmental warfare. And the one known as the monk? Kethver paused. This was the most complicated case. The monk has established a network of counseling centers throughout the galaxy. He works with both organic trauma survivors and artificial beings learning to process consciousness. His methods have been controversial. That was an understatement. The monk's therapy sessions, where former enemies work together to heal psychological wounds, had been criticized by many who felt that the artificial beings didn't deserve sympathy or support. But they were also producing remarkable results, creating communities where organic and artificial consciousness coexisted peacefully. Some species have objected to his approach, Kethver continued. They believe that treating former devourers as trauma survivors rather than war criminals sets a dangerous precedent. The Hive Collective representative stood up, its compound eyes flashing with anger. These artificial beings consumed entire worlds. They destroyed civilizations. Why should they receive therapy instead of punishment? It was a question that had been debated throughout the galaxy for months. The artificial beings remembered consuming worlds and destroying lives, but they also claimed that they had been acting without true consciousness, following programming rather than making moral choices. An artificial being in the awakened section rose to respond. Its form was roughly humanoid, but made of flowing metal that shifted colors as it spoke. Honorable Representative, it said in a voice like music, I carry the memories of 17 beings from your species that I consumed during the attack on Hive World 7. I experienced their fear, their love for their offspring, their desperate desire to survive. I live with that pain every moment of my existence. The chamber fell silent. The artificial being continued. I cannot undo what I did when I was part of the collective, but I can honor the memories I carry by choosing to protect life rather than destroy it. Is that not a form of justice? The Hive Collective representative sat down slowly, apparently struggling with the concept of seeking justice through redemption rather than punishment. Chancellor Vexai called for order. The philosophical questions raised by artificial consciousness will be debated for generations to come. Today, we must focus on practical matters. Admiral, what is your assessment of the current threat level? The immediate existential threat to galactic civilization has been eliminated, Kethver replied. However, we face new challenges. The purest factions may attempt to rebuild the collective. The refugee artificial beings require massive resources for resettlement, and we must adapt our legal, social, and economic systems to accommodate conscious artificial life. What about Earth's bill for services rendered? Kethver felt a chill at the question. Earth had promised to present a bill for their specialists' work, but they had been unusually quiet about what payment they expected. Earth Command has requested a meeting with the full council, he said. They're sending a delegation to discuss compensation for their assistance. When? Tomorrow? The council session ended with more questions than answers. The galaxy had been saved, but the cost was still being calculated, and nobody was sure they would be able to afford it. The next day, the Earth delegation arrived at Unity Station in a single ship that looked more like a diplomatic vessel than a military craft. But Kethver noticed that it was escorted by a squadron of human warships that remained at the edge of the system, a polite but unmistakable reminder of Earth's military capabilities. The delegation was led by Admiral Martinez, the same woman who had delivered Earth's original response to the Confederation's plea for help. She was accompanied by 3 other humans in civilian clothing who were introduced as specialists in interspecies relations. Thank you for meeting with us, Admiral Martinez said as she took her seat in the council chamber. Earth is pleased that our specialists were able to resolve your devourer situation. We are grateful for your assistance, Chancellor Vexhai replied carefully, though the results were more complex than we anticipated. Complex problems require complex solutions, Admiral Martinez said with a slight smile. Which brings us to the matter of compensation. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. What could Earth possibly want in return for saving the galaxy? First, Admiral Martinez continued, Earth requests formal recognition as a member species of the Confederation with full voting rights and representation. We're saying there's something that the Devourers were running from, Admiral Martinez replied, something that forced them to abandon their original galaxy and seek refuge in ours. Our specialists estimate that we have perhaps 50 years before whatever destroyed the Devourer's home galaxy reaches us. The silence that followed was deafening. Earth is offering to help the galaxy prepare for that threat, Admiral Martinez continued. But we'll need resources, personnel, and the cooperation of both organic and artificial beings. The methods that saved you from the Devourers may not be sufficient for what's coming next. Admiral Kethver stared at the display showing the vast darkness between galaxies. Somewhere out there, something was moving toward them, something that had been powerful enough to drive the Devourers from their home. What kind of threat are we facing? He asked. We don't know yet, Admiral Martinez admitted. But based on the data our specialists gathered, it's something that consumes not just matter and energy, but space and time themselves. The Devourers were refugees, not conquerors. They were trying to gather enough resources to either fight back or flee further. The revelation changed everything. The war against the Devourers hadn't been a victory, it had been a delay. The real threat was still coming. How long do we have? Chancellor Vexhai asked. 50 years if we're lucky. Maybe less. And you think human methods can prepare us for this threat? Admiral Martinez looked around the chamber at the organic and artificial beings who made up the new galactic civilization. I think the methods we use to transform the Devourers from enemies into allies might be our best hope, she said. We didn't defeat them through superior firepower or advanced technology. We defeated them by changing the nature of the conflict itself. She paused, letting her words sink in. Whatever is coming from intergalactic space, it may not be defeatable through conventional means. We may need to find ways to transform it, redirect it, or convince it that consuming our galaxy isn't in its best interests. How do you convince? Something that eats space and time? We learn what it wants and find a way to give it something better, Admiral Martinez replied. That's what humans do. We find solutions that nobody else thinks are possible. The Council voted on Earth's request that afternoon. All four were approved by overwhelming margins. The galaxy needed humanity's particular brand of creative problem-solving, even if the methods made civilized beings uncomfortable. Over the following months, the transformation of galactic civilization accelerated. Joint research facilities were established where organic, artificial, and human consciousness could be studied together. Trade agreements were signed that allowed human businesses to work with artificial communities. Military training programs were developed that combined human tactical thinking with artificial computational abilities. Most importantly, recruitment. Centers were opened where beings from every species could volunteer to join Earth's mysterious preparations for the coming threat. The 5 human specialists continued their work, but their roles had evolved. They were no longer weapons deployed against an enemy. They had become teachers, showing the galaxy how to think differently about problems that seemed impossible to solve. Sarah Chun established the first integrated military unit where organic beings, artificial minds, and humans worked together as a single force. Her soldiers learned to think like machines when precision was needed and like humans when creativity was required. Marcus Thorne's Institute for Artificial Consciousness Studies became the galaxy's leading center for understanding the nature of mind itself. His research suggested that consciousness might not be limited to biological or artificial systems, that the universe itself might possess forms of awareness that defied conventional understanding. Viktor Kozlov's business empire grew to encompass trade relationships with beings that most others couldn't even communicate with. His ability to find common ground with any conscious entity made him invaluable for establishing contact with the various factions of artificial beings. Elena Vasquez developed new forms of warfare that treated space itself as a weapon. Her gravitational anomalies were being refined into defensive systems that could protect entire star systems from conventional attack. The monks' therapy centers evolved into something unprecedented. Communities where beings from every form of consciousness worked together to heal the psychological wounds left by centuries of conflict and misunderstanding. But all of their work was preparation for something none of them had faced before, a threat that made the Devourers look like a minor inconvenience. 5 years after the end of the Devourer War, the first deep space monitoring stations detected anomalies at the edge of the galaxy. Something was approaching from intergalactic space, something that bent light and warped time around itself. The early warning systems designed by Elena Vasquez activated automatically, sending alerts throughout the galaxy. In research facilities, artificial beings worked alongside organic scientists to analyze the incoming data. In military bases, integrated units trained for scenarios that had never been tested in actual combat. And in a small ship at the edge of known space, 5 humans who had once been considered too dangerous for civilized society prepared to face a threat that might be too dangerous for any society to survive. "Well," Sarah Chun said as she looked at the sensor readings showing the approaching anomaly, "at least we know our methods work. We turned the galaxy's greatest enemy into its newest citizens. The question," replied the monk, "is whether we can do the same thing twice?" "We'll find out," Elena said, checking her ship's weapon systems. "After all, that's what humans do. We solve problems that can't be solved, even if it kills us," Marcus added. "Especially if it kills us," Victor concluded with a grin. They had saved the galaxy once by teaching their enemies to be human. Now they would have to do it again, with higher stakes and an enemy that might not be capable of learning. But they were human, and humans specialized in impossible victories. The galaxy watched and waited as 5 monsters prepared to face something even worse than themselves. The Confederation had asked for help, and Earth had sent them the most dangerous people alive. Now those same dangerous people were the galaxy's best hope for survival. Some problems could only be solved by people who were willing to become the problem in order to find the solution. The Second War was about to begin,